I'm June Gruber, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Colorado Boulder and director of this mental health expert series. I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. Judy Garber, the Cornelius Vanderbilt professor of psychology and human development at Vanderbilt University, about her groundbreaking work on emotion dysregulation and internalizing disorders in children and adolescents. So thank you for being here today, Judy.
My pleasure.
I was wondering if we could start just by hearing a bit about the kind of mental health work that you do.
The main questions that I've been interested in for the 4 decades plus that I've been at this has been what causes depression and how can we prevent it? And that's kind of been the driving force behind all of the work that I've done. I've conducted several longitudinal studies looking at risk factors, focusing mainly on psychosocial factors such as stress, social cognition, family environment, and mostly in offspring of depressed parents. And then I've moved toward trying to use some of these risk factors to try to implement programs for preventing the onset of mood disorders in adolescents. So that's kind of the overview. So.
Wonderful. And how did you first go about getting started in this work?
I've always been interested in depression, largely because it just, it's so common and it just made a lot of sense to me as something that I could relate to. But I guess the strongest influence on me was when I went to the University of Pennsylvania as a research assistant. It was a post-bac experience, and worked in the lab of Marty Seligman. And he probably had the greatest influence on my thinking and really taught me how to think critically and how to ask interesting questions. He had this way that he'd look at you and go, why is that interesting? And it's kind of like kept in the back of my head for after that, which is, okay, what am I doing and why is this interesting and why is this important? So that was kind of, I'd say that the foundation of my work. And then from there went to Minnesota for graduate school and worked with several people. But I think my work, my experience at University of Pennsylvania was the most influential.
And starting with, the origins, talking about your influential work at University of Pennsylvania until now, what have been some kind of notable frustrations or failures along the way, as well as successes that you've savored in your career?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Again, this is kind of more looking back than what I necessarily experienced along the way. But I think looking back, I've always been interested in issues of, politics and social policy, and it's very salient right now. And I kind of wish that I had my work had a greater impact on that area. I think preventing depression is important and has its implications, but I think there are other really important questions out there that are very salient, and I don't know that I've touched any of those. So that would be kind of a frustration or challenge. And I guess my successes, I think I'm most happy with the work on prevention, and that I think we've done some good work there. Probably the Foresight study of prevention of depression in at-risk adolescents was probably my best, and hopefully not my last. So.
Well, and speaking of, all the, work you've done and the work that you will do, what do you find to be some of the most important next steps in the field looking ahead?
Yeah, I guess the important thing in the field is to kind of take what we're looking at in basic science, brain science, and combining that with what we understand as the social context in which kids develop, and putting those together, not in a so they're not kind of competing with each other. I think the trick is to say, okay, how does the brain work, and how is the context in which a child is developing influence the brain, and vice versa. So I think that's the task for the future, which is more interdisciplinary, integrative work, as well as having an impact on real social policy and what's going on in the world, and tremendous inequities that we see today, and can we have an impact on that?
And this leads me to the last question I wanted to ask you, which is, what advice would you have for others who are watching this interview today? Maybe they're students, the public, other mental health professionals who are interested in getting engaged in the field or learning more.
Yeah, I think if you're just starting out, the trick is to find something that interests you. Find I don't want to call it a passion, because that doesn't ring true to me, but something that really is interesting to you. Again, I've said I've always wanted to know about depression because that made sense to me. So if you can find something that really interests you and then kind of pursue a question or two that underlies your work, and the most kind of personal thing is just to persist. She persisted. Just as you run into challenges, which you will, and delays and obstacles, just basically get over it and move on, and go on to the next thing. So those are the main things, and just try to be open-minded and integrative. So I think the limitations we have in the field is people get into their little boxes and don't think about other things that are going on. So think more broadly. So.
It's inspiring advice, truly. So thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your insights and your overview of your career. It's really phenomenal. I'm really grateful to have you part of this series.
I appreciate it. Thank you.